Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name is Mary Williams and I'm the Mind Architect. I'm also founder of the Alternative Leader Academy and author of It Begins With You. This podcast is dedicated to inspiring the leaders of today to lead with intention, both in their personal and their professional lives. My guests from across the world share their challenges, their knowledge and their experiences so that we can learn from these powerful insights to help us lead with strength, determination and compassion. Welcome to the Alternative Leader podcast. My name is Mary Williams and I'm the Mind Architect. Today's special guest is John Spencer. He is an award-winning scholar, professor, author and combat veteran, and an internationally recognised expert and advisor. He currently serves as the Chair of Urban Warfare Studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point, and he's host of the Urban Warfare Project podcast. John served 25 years in active duty in the US Army and is the author of the new book, Connected Soldiers: Life, Leadership and Social Connections in Modern War. You may have seen John recently as he's been on TV a lot talking about Ukraine and fighting an urban war. John's book is absolutely fantastic, as he is in person, and he happily discusses in it a wonderful moment of leadership where he thinks he got it wrong and how he got out of it. So tune in to listen and find out what would John do now in that situation. Welcome, John. So, John, I've got some questions that I want to ask you, having read your just published book, Connected Soldiers, and I fully recommend anybody out there, whether you're interested in the army or not, to read this because it is fully about the army, but it's also not about the army. It's about social cohesion, it's about family, it's about friendships. It's about so many other things than just army. And that was one of the things that I've loved about it. So first of all, what drove you to write it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, of course, I had a passion for writing. I found a passion for writing right at the end of my 25-year Army career. But also some of my military experiences, this is a memoir really of my combat experiences, were pretty traumatic, to be honest, and very challenging from a leadership perspective. So it was, as some, you might hear veterans say, like a therapy, right? To get my story out. But I also think I had written an op-ed for the New York Times back in 2015 about this concern about electronic communication impacting performance. Really, it was combat performance, but it could be anybody's performance of these different worlds that we live in. And that was, you could say, the driving motivation, but it was really a passion to get the story out, to help others, and I don't really provide a lot of answers, and rightfully so. There's a little bit of criticism there, right? I don't give a lot of answers, but I ask a lot of questions, and I'm a big believer that learning is living. So hopefully some people will ask the right questions after reading the book.
And I agree. I think it was interesting. I hadn't noticed that there weren't solutions in there, but I certainly engaged with all the questions, and it made me reflect about, some of the things my clients express, which is, I've actually seen a client for, social media addiction. And I know myself, sometimes I can go to bed thinking, right, I'm going to switch the light off at 11:30 and suddenly it's 12 o'clock and I've been scrolling for an hour, absolutely just junk, So I think we all fall into that kind of social media, and you call it in the book actually an addiction. And what I really liked was you kind of talked about the soldiers, and we will come on to that, but you said, actually I too fell into this category of feeling, not waiting for that kind of my name to be called to have the mail on the bed, but actually wanting that kind of "you've got mail" voice at the end of the day. And it was fascinating. I think I wrote down in my notes actually, what's the problem with connectivity? And then afterwards I've kind of gone, oh, okay, I can see what the problem with connectivity is, because you go on to talk about it. One of the most interesting things that I thought, and in the book you go on to talk about how, it removes focus on a mission. If somebody's worrying about what's going on at home, and you talk about getting an email from, I think it was your sister who lost her job at the time, but there was this interesting part where you were saying, actually some of the soldiers would have been better in the kind of World War II scenario where they had to wait for the letter and actually probably what got written was most of the really serious information, and that it was actually impacting missions. And you talk about a soldier whose, I think, girlfriend was pregnant and kind of taking drugs, and that this, directly affected going out on patrol that day. So tell me sort of a bit more about that, because there's that instantness to this information, how that
Yeah.
affected the cohesion and actually what you were there to do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? So I don't want to be the old guy just pounding on the desk saying, these kids and their electronics. So that's why I wrote the story, right? The story, I think people learn through stories and through examples. So there's absolutely positives in being connected, right? And this is later in the book. I talk about my wife going off the war, and I'm at home. But there are significant challenges and problems as well, like this soldier. And I've got a lot of pushback on this soldier who got a call, at night, saying his wife or his girlfriend was overdosing on drugs and pregnant, and he was just a wreck because he hadn't slept, because he was trying to reach out through everybody. And my leader, one of my junior leaders, said he can't go out today. So a huge impact on our ability to do our mission. This soldier literally can't go out and do his job today. But in hindsight, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That we lead people. If they're not bringing if people aren't bringing you their problems, you're probably not leading in the right way, for us especially. But it is this dichotomy of having a foot in both worlds, which has never been the case of soldiers in war. And you could do it in a business place too. But when I try to walk through the book, like, if that's actually a bad and a good example. The bad example is, it's the reality of the world that we live in. You're not going to change it, right? I'm not just going to flip the switch and just turn everybody off from their, drop your phone off when you show up to work kind of thing. It's the world that we live in. But like we did here, we had to recognize there was a problem, had to adapt to it. But if it's not a part of leading, like in the book I showed, then it can literally break down the entire organization. We have an entire organization of people that are living in virtual worlds and not communicating to each other and being a team, which in war is the only way they survive, is as a group. They don't survive as individuals, right? You only survive as a group. And this problem impacts professional sports teams to businesses around the world. And we have to learn to lead in this new environment. And that's what I try to expose in the book, that I had to, in the most stressful situation I've ever been in my life, had to learn to lead in this new environment where you had every individual with a foot back home and a foot in war. But the same thing as we're seeing, like in Ukraine, now you have the world with a foot in war. I can watch it, and it actually impacts you. And I mean, I also wrote this book before COVID. So I was sending a message about this ideal that we can get all that we need through virtual mediums. In war, it's a clear fact. You have to have physical connections. You have to be connected to the people to your left in life very deeply. And that's the only way to survive. I think COVID taught us that it's human nature. I need physical connections. I can go into the virtual for a certain amount of time, but literally to survive as humans, we need physical connections.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I think there was a lot of damage done by the separation in COVID. I 100% agree with that. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating, and actually way back in my 20s, I was dating a guy who went in as a medic into the army, and he was in the first wave that went over to Kosovo. And we had mobiles by then, but the signals were absolutely awful. And he used to say to me that he used to stand on a hill on a fridge and kind of hold the phone in the air. Remember, we used to have to hold the phone in the air to get better signal. And I used to say to him, don't do that, because we knew that there were snipers and things around where they were. And I was like, I'd rather not hear from you than you do that. So I do have a kind of understanding of wanting that connectivity. But what I thought what was interesting in the book was the difference that you talked about, which was, pre-connectivity, that you would go through this traumatic experience, and you talk about some of them. And one of the ones I was just reading was, about the young Iraqi boy getting hit in the stomach with the grenade. And that in the old days, you would have sat and you would have debriefed and you would have talked and you would have shared. and there would have been that camaraderie of, right, this is a shared experience, and I get you because I was there. And actually, I think you say in the book that you went up afterwards, kind of trying to look for people, and everybody was back in doing social media, talking to their family, and also that you're very rarely going to share, and you kind of can't share because if it's an experience you haven't had, how bad that was. And I know when my partner came home at the time, there were a couple of things he told me, which in some respects I was a bit like, oh my gosh, that's really quite a big thing that you just told me. And I had to go and kind of process it. I was no use to him. And I think, yeah, what can you say? And you say, like, what can the wife say? I'm really sorry, that sounds awful. It's not the same as talking to someone there. And so, can you tell us a bit more about, having noticed that ability, as you say, to almost have the kind of the hug, the pat on the back, to be in that environment where you are listened to, heard, and fully understood.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most strongest example I could provide of the danger of connectivity, right? So the soldier had been through a very traumatic incident where the enemy tried to attack them, and it ended up killing a young Iraqi boy. The soldier who I interviewed in more detail even after the war was, a guy who had a kid at about the same age, and it really impacted him. And that night after that patrol, I tried to find them, like you said, they're all connected. I mean, I think as I dug through why did it matter was understanding that those physical connections, that cohesion, it matters in actual fighting, right? So we have to have this ability of fighting as a group. But as I pulled on the thread of just trying to learn about it more, it was actually that this group is also how you deal with war, as in the mental aspects of it. And it's when I've grown up as a kid, I viewed counseling as a bad thing. Right. I grew up in the military understanding that having some ideal of what strength and power was, and to be strong is to be able to handle anything you get thrown at. And we're famous at compartmentalizing. But as I looked at the history of war, I didn't understand that those campfires, those meetings after the event was actually group counseling, right? It was, and this is what I experienced in 2003. Didn't know what it was, but we'd come back for something very climactic, very stressful incident, and we'd come back and we'd just sit around and talk about it. It was literally group counseling. It was coping. It was the coping mechanism. Because of the connections of modern technologies, I saw that not happening in 2008. And that was the first alarm that really inspired the book, was that didn't understand that this wasn't happening, and it must have impacts. If you can't decompress, talk through what you just saw, say, hey, this is really bothering me, and then somebody else give you that assurance of, absolutely, this is bothering me too. And as a group, there is no weakness or strength. It's literally just talking about what you've just been through. And it was, to me, it was really, an aha moment that I realized that, hey, look, you're not going to change the world of connectivity, but there are times you need to talk to other people about what you're experiencing in it. And the primary group is what they call it, primary group cohesion, is the mechanism that allows soldiers to also deal with the stress and the traumatic incidents. And once we stop doing that practice, I try to show in the book that there are byproducts of when you don't have that, and this is the problem with an institution like the Army, right? The Army's 1 million people. Like, it has more workers than Walmart, right? It's so these daily practices of what you do at work, sometimes people forget of why you do them. So the campfire, or the meeting after the patrol, was actually had multiple reasons why you did it, and one of the big ones is to be able to cope with what you just did.
Do you think that, and you've said quite rightly, we can't unplug people, but do you think that there might be a move to almost having, that we come home and we sit, we come back from the mission and we sit and we chat, and that's what we do, and then you can go off and you can debrief? Do you think there will be more of a, that actually it hasn't been kind of put in because kind of we didn't notice that there was a problem in not being there, but now, with all the research you've done and other people have done, I'm sure, kind of going, oh, okay, hang on, actually, no, we are going to have to put this back in. Do you think structurally it will be put back in?
I hope so. And there to be right. And so my book is also a leadership book about my own
Mm,
inadequacy, failures, dealing with the
mm,
stress of command and
mm,
leadership. There are units that even during this time when I my unit wasn't doing it that were
mm, mm,
forcing meetings after patrols. We call them patrol
mm,
debriefs, things like that.
mm,
Um, I even point out in the book that eating together is actually a bonding experience.
mm.
So it's another moment in which you can be, and then we do this as a family. I do it because me and my wife are both in the military. We think it's very important to have, unconnected, just face
Yeah.
to face. So we eat as a family together with no. So that's one instance of another time. So the eating together every
Mm,
day as a unit
mm,
was something that was not being done
mm,
systematically. Something happened in our deployment to where it was then forced and put back into practice, which
mm,
actually had, again, positive outcomes, right? You building a team.
mm,
It's really an understanding of when people need to connect in
mm.
as a group, and when they'll be
Yeah.
connected to the other organizations and their other lives and their online communities and the support
Mm,
groups, which are all,
mm,
good and, bad.
mm,
There are good and bads
mm,
of it. So will they put it back in? I hope so.
mm.
As the military does struggle with things like, they still struggle with mental health and
Yeah.
suicide and things like that. I mean,
Mm,
the trials of war are always going to be there, but
mm.
some of this is just about leading a healthy life, right? I
Yeah.
need to,
Yeah.
and this is my experience getting out of the military, right? A lot of people in the military struggle getting out, right? Getting back
Yeah.
into, because they
Yeah.
no longer have their tribe or their community.
Mm,
I need to talk to people every day. I mean, I've found new ways to do that, but
mm,
it's really a
mm,
part of leading a healthy life.
mm. Yeah, that's really interesting actually. Talking about, how people struggle to settle back in and just how many programs there are for that sort of thing, because you use the comparison of kind of family to family, that often soldiers are leaving their own family going into being part of another family, and that, I know I've been on some sort of just silly things like retreats, for 4 days where I bonded with other people, and it is a pull to come away from something like that. So when you're thinking about coming away from something you've been in for months and months and months, incredibly intense situation, you're probably trauma bonded, these people might have saved your life, and suddenly, you might not see them again, or see them, for a really long time, and you're suddenly expected to, go down the supermarket and buy oranges every day. That's hard, isn't it? That's a hard transition.
Extremely hard. And we didn't talk about it, but it also used to be a part of the old process of war, was coming back would take a long time. You'd sit on
Mm.
a boat for 6 months. Well,
Yeah.
what was that? That was decompressing. That was talking about what you're going to do and all these things. And now, like my experiences in combat, I could be in combat and in 24 hours be back at my house. Uh, it it can happen that fast.
Yeah.
they try for us. They try to
Mm.
force classes about
Mm.
reintegrating back into a
Mm.
different life.
Mm.
But what I've found too in leadership is you have to give people the right information at the right time.
Mm.
So
Mm.
forced training doesn't always work because it's not
No.
the right moment, right? Or it's
Yeah.
just not delivered in the right way
Mm.
to be real.
Mm. Mm. How did you find that coming back in 24 hours? Gone back to kitchen table.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a different situation at the time. I didn't have kids. I didn't have
Mm.
a wife. I had a girlfriend who was also military. So
Mm.
my first experience was probably the hardest in 2003 when I came back, because we came back and then you're trying to reintegrate into your family.
Mm.
I mean, it is leaving one world and joining another. And
Mm.
connectivity helps in this, right?
Mm.
Actually, when my wife went off to war, I tried to shield her from home, and she wanted
Mm.
nothing to do with that, because
Mm.
what I found in the military is that we all want meaning, right? And family can be, it is my number one meaning now, right?
Yeah.
My identity as a father. So
Mm.
when my wife left for military for work, that was her number one goal in life, was not to be forgotten, not
Mm.
not for somebody to, for us as a family to create a new identity without her. So she wanted to talk to the kids every day, even when they didn't, which is rough, didn't want to talk to her.
Mm.
This is, we lead individuals, so this is an understanding that
Mm.
people people's
Mm,
identity
mm,
are very important to them. So
yeah.
when in war, our identity should be the group.
Mm,
But every individual is a complex social
mm,
being of multiple identities.
mm.
And this is a higher level understanding that I think leaders have to have today.
Yeah. I agree, and I think that's really interesting. In fact, one of my notes was about, you said soldiers lead two lives. They're kind of, and I thought this is really interesting because actually you said their combat life and their online presence. And so you think automatically two lives, oh, it's the life back at home and the life here. But actually, you're talking about something slightly nuanced because the online presence is not actually exactly who they are back at home. And again, in the book, you talk about people who make up things that they're putting on social media and things like that. So it's very much I'm nurturing this kind of character of me or caricature of me, and then I have this going on. And so in some respects, they're running three lives, aren't they? Because they're running the actual life that they run back at home, this sort of social media life, and then this combat life. I mean, that's just quite crazy, really.
Yeah, but I mean, if we think about it, it is the world we live on.
Mm,
A lot of people spend a lot of time curating their online life,
mm,
and that's social media, right?
mm,
Whether it's
mm.
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, there's all kinds of new ones I never even heard about.
Yeah.
Um, that's a part of their identity and their search for meaning, right?
Mm,
And this is
mm,
really in my book is it's almost like my own journey for searching for meaning in
mm,
different ways.
mm.
That is an important part of people's
Mm,
lives today,
mm.
unlike it's ever been in history, is
Yeah.
is managing their online identity.
Mm. One of the things that sort of I love the reference of in the book was you talk about this. I think you said, and I thought, oh, I bet that would sting a bit. You said I carried the picture of was it your wife or your girlfriend, and you said in my
It was
helmet.
my it was wife, yeah.
You said because I thought I should or something. I thought, oh. But then you go on to say, but we do that because we've seen it in movies and we've seen it on the TV, and how it was a kind of well, this is what a soldier does. They carry their loved ones in their helmet, kind of thing. And so I love that frame of reference to we do what we do in the movies, and so I had two questions about this. So one of them was, do you think that when people go into the army, they go into, I've watched Band of Brothers and it's going to be like that, or do you think they go and do those people actually make it through?
Absolutely. I think that we all come into the army like I did. Band of Brothers wasn't out yet. So I watched things like The A Team or G.I. Joe
Yeah.
or you know, all these different movies. Absolutely. And it is a part of the world that
Mm,
whether you're going into the military or you're just an observer of the military,
mm,
you hold something in your mind that has been built by
mm,
popular media, books, movies, popular sayings, stories that
mm,
people carry. And I came in the military, and I think every individual who does, and sometimes that causes. So I joined, and it was what I had imagined. In my deployment in 2003 was everything that I
mm,
had imagined war would be like.
mm,
But by the time the war has changed, right? 2008 is when I went back. The war had
mm,
changed. We were fighting a
mm,
different war, a different army, uh, and some people who were joining at that moment in time achieve really cognitive dissonance. This isn't
mm,
what I imagined war would be
mm,
like. This
mm,
isn't the army that I imagined it would be like.
mm,
And that's the reality of the world. I think it applies to any profession.
mm,
You
mm,
come into it imagining something,
mm,
whether it's special forces or something like that, but then you hit the reality. And sometimes the reality meets your idea. And
mm,
sometimes it's really polar opposites. And there's
mm,
this bit of cognitive dissonance that
mm,
happens and unhappiness that's caused.
mm,
And this is really what I also tried to explain in the book in 2008, right? The US military specifically was really stretched thin and a lot of things were
mm,
going bad. And if you
mm,
joined at that moment, luckily I
mm,
had served in the army for a long time before that. But if you joined the army at that moment, it would not match the
mm,
ideals you had from a little kid until
yeah.
you're a grown adult joining the military.
Mm. I think that's really fascinating. Do you think to kind of come to my second point, do you think that because you say when you went again, actually no one printed pictures anymore. So you just didn't no one had the picture in the helmet. Do do you see a problem with that? Did you see, do you think that changed the relationship? Did it do anything differently? The fact that people didn't have that like very concrete connection.
So yes and no. So yeah, no, I didn't see any printed pictures, but you might carry a phone on a picture on your phone, right? So lots of photos. But then I actually try to break down the way people talk to each other now too, right? So electronic communication is different than the actual old school writing of letters. There's something actually physiological about this, right? Even when my wife deployed, and they could talk to my wife every day, but my kids wanted something physical in their hand.
Yeah.
So when they received mail, and could be just a drawing from mom, to be very vulnerable, my kids would sleep with some of those photos because the connection to physical properties, there's something really real to that. So I think this is the problem with the not printing out the photos, right? I didn't see any photos because you have it electronically. Why do you need it? But there's actually something very biological to physical stuff, and studies about how people write to each other electronically, right? I can text you and I can emoji. So my son wanted to emoji talk to my wife, and my wife hated it. She's like, he's not talking to me. And it might be like a smiley face. But the actual research on the way people write to each other in war, right? It used to be trying to have the person who is not with you understand the environment, like very descriptive. Now, if you can talk to somebody electronically, the actual content of the message is different.
I think I was interestingly talking to a client literally today, struggling in their relationship, and I suggested they wrote a letter, hand pen to paper letter to their partner, and they sort of looked at me, and I said, honestly, the brain receives handwritten, it's in my hand. This person sat down with a pen and written, and I can see it in the way that they've written, whether they're stressed or loving, or that it's really, really impactful, and we don't do it. I know I have one friend who I just love her. She always writes to me pen to paper, always, and it just gives me this burst of joy when I see the envelope with her name on it. And I always say to her, I just love that you do that. And it's junk, it's a day, it's nothing important, but as you say, it's so different to a text communication.
Absolutely. And as leaders, you think about a CEO, a president, or somebody who you receive something like, it can be just an autograph, and that's a real autograph versus an auto pinned. I have framed stuff on my walls signed by people that I respect. We attribute meaning to that physical product because they spent the time. So as leaders, we know that in the military, right? We have all these practices of giving awards, giving coins, giving a personal letter, just saying, great job, congratulations on being promoted. Maybe people forget that means a lot to that individual.
I think the written word is really interesting. Something I do for my clients. Sometimes I'll just drop the postcard. Just say you're doing really well. And actually, I had a few go to the US. Just recently, and someone said, "Why are you bothering to post a postcard over?" And I said, because it will mean something when it arrives. So I've actually gone to the post office. I've handwritten something. I've bothered to do that. I could have just sent a text. It's not the same. It's not the same thing. There was a couple of things I wanted to come back to. You said a couple of times about how your wife was deployed. How did you find switch in positioning for the two of you?
I found it to be horrible, actually. I write in a book that I'd rather lead, an attack against an enemy city than to go through that experience again. So my kids were, what were they, 7, 5, and 3 at the time, and dealing with that from, and I tried my own ways of structure and everything, but really, if you look at I'm a military guy, so how we deal with stressful situation is an ideal control, right? So we do a lot of things to try to give us a sense of control. Well, leading, little kids, there's no controlling of little kids, but also I try to explain in the book as a protector, like I want to protect my kids, and going through that experience and not being able to help them in any way was really traumatic to me, more than war, really. Having like my youngest daughter was starting to show social emotional
Mm,
problems, right? Problems from not having mom there. And
mm,
that wrecked me as an individual, not being able to help.
mm. It's incredibly tough, isn't it? As a parent, anything that goes wrong with your kids, you just, you'd give an arm for to try and, to try and get rid of it. One of the questions actually I had, I've obviously not that part in the book, but is, what, so in the England, it's really interesting because we see a lot of these reunion videos with, US parents coming home and they go to the baseball club, and they're the guy with the mask on or the woman with the they're all covered up somehow, and this reunion, and I find them really emotional. I watch the little reels and I find it very, very emotional, and it kind of just doesn't seem to be a sort of a thing here. And so that's what I was going to say to you is with such a huge work, a million people, and with deployment for such long amounts of time, I mean, how do you think that does affect children in the long term growing up with that? Do you think it's something that they, as they get older, they process and kind of just get used to? Like, my kids have all had to go to their dads, alternate weekends and get used to that separation. So what's
Yeah.
your thought on it?
So it's a great question. And my wife actually did her degree in child psychology and kids 3 to 5. And she could just tell me all the ways I was messing my kids up. Uh, so, yeah, you're right. So 12 to 15 months were the type of the deployments that the US was doing for a large portion, at least of Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm a big believer in data, right? So in God, I trust, all others bring data. So the data does show that it extended deployments like that on a regular basis was traumatic to kids. It leads to more depression, to lots of bad, but it's what we serve for is understanding of it. And the military has done everything it can to try to mitigate that impact. But I think there's other research that shows like the military moving, like we move every 2 to 3 years. That helps build resilience in kids, their ability to deal with that, make new friends, make new teams. So that kind of like the connectivity, you can't say it's all bad, right? So there are positives and negatives, but uh, my community here was bent over backwards once they understood that our kids were a part of this community of people with one parent gone. It's more impactful during like things like holidays and stuff like that. So it can I say it's good or bad? Of course it's going to impact my kids. Although I talk to my kids now, and time does, which is really important to me when I was writing the book, to journal, because I didn't want time to weaken the feelings I was having, right? Like you said, those videos are so interesting because they bring out feelings in all of us, right? Clearly it does me too, but my kids, some already starting to forget about that 9 months. My wife was gone for 9 months. They're like, I don't remember that. Like, oh, that's good. And in some instances, so my oldest son was reading that chapter of my book recently and just started crying. Like, why are you crying? He's like, he was remembering the experience of mom being gone for 9 months. So, and I'm still learning like how to help them deal with that, because now he clearly remembers it. But this is life, right? So this is even my career is adversity actually, or the downtimes can actually be amazing amounts of growth, right? So I'm hoping that it becomes a part of his life, and we absence does cause for fondness. It makes you appreciate what you've lost. You try to work through the traumatic episodes, but I was really, and I'm still dealing with it. Like it was like 4 years later, he was reading that chapter and just starts crying.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard to see. It is interesting what you say though, because one of my neighbors is, I think she's 85, and she just, her whole presence, where she stands, everything about her is just confident, resilient. And I'm surrounded by old people, a few years ago I invited them all around for tea and cake to get to know them. And she was saying she'd had a military upbringing, and she said we moved all the time. I had to make new friends all the time, and she's just really at 85 she still lives alone. She's completely self-sufficient. She doesn't have a partner now, but just it is a really interesting difference in that kind of, absolutely, as you say, it's going to take a toll somewhere. but it actually gave her these other qualities, which she said, actually, yeah, that was a problem. But actually the other stuff was really useful. And she said it actually made her career easier because she would go anywhere. So she said, I wasn't kind of going, oh, I don't leave my hometown, because my hometown was sort of 9 different places as I grew up. So it is interesting.
Yeah. And I had to get uncomfortable with talking to the kids about it. Right. So I'm personally a compartmentalizer. And I told my wife this, I'd rather you go away for 9 months, come back, and I'll be happy when you come back. So I had to get really comfortable talking, I had to practice what I was preaching, even in the book, right? Having the conversation, like, and not having the answers, right? Sometimes just talking about it. And I didn't have the answers of how he should deal with, my kids should deal with mom being gone. But I wasn't afraid to talk to them about it. Like, yeah, I hurt too, right? So being able to have those awkward, hard conversations with even people you work with, like the campfire, right? Some of those conversations are going to be really rough, to show vulnerability, even if you're in a position of, power, if you want to use that word. So I try to do that with my kids. I try to practice what I preach and show them that I was hurting as well. We're going to get through this together. It's okay to be sad. All those conversations I made sure I had.
It reminds me of a completely different scenario, but I had a miscarriage. My older children were, I think, 14, 12, and 10. Everybody knew, we were really excited. And I remember there was really interesting different reactions. My 10-year-old just sort of cried, who quite liked the idea of a baby. My 12-year-old son at the time, who I just gut instinct knew that he didn't want it. He just went, oh, I'm glad. And a lot of my friends said, how can you hear that? And I said, actually, I was quite relieved to hear that, because I just knew that's what was going on. And I kind of liked the fact that he was able to just go, oh, good. I didn't have an issue with it. I was like, oh, great, it's been said. Wow. But my 14-year-old, I remember, she was absolutely devastated, obviously that bit older. And I remember that we had a whole conversation about a recipe. And I said, having a baby is like a recipe. And halfway through, your body says, oh, God, I'm missing an ingredient, and that's not going to work out. So I'm going to start again. And she found that a really useful way of looking at it. But that ability to have a conversation that you don't want to have at a time when you probably don't want to have it, and to not know all the answers. And I think so many parents have that, don't we? Have to have those conversations. Really, if there was no kid around, we just wouldn't be having a conversation, and you have to make yourself do it. So yeah, I can understand, how that felt.
Yeah, but, and I absolutely understand the one about each one has their own personality.
Yeah.
And they deal with whatever it is. I think this applies to me being a dad. I have to treat every kid differently and know when something's going to impact them differently. But I think even in leadership, I once heard an analogy that it's like being a gardener, right? You got to water some plants more than others, and you got to cut things. And I thought it was a useful analogy back when I heard that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In fact, I was just about to come on to leadership. So there's an interesting bit in the book where you talk about leadership, and you talk about going into, I think you have to forgive me, I can't remember the group that you were going into. But you go in and you were saying that the leaders were really poor. And you said it was like the wild, wild west. And you go on to talk about how, it's almost like probably the people who initially went into that group were like, oh, great, it's not strict and I'm not so bothered. But actually that almost rolls, especially in that situation, in a kind of wartime situation, that rolls into chaos that starts to make people feel really unsafe quite quickly. And you even actually, I think you liken it to the fact as parents, we have to set boundaries. And actually kids kind of, I know I used to work as a family worker, and I know that the kids where the parents were like, this is the routine. They kind of, oh yeah, my parents are really strict. But they kind of, that was fine because I know where I stand and I know what I do. And I distinctly remember I worked with a little girl who didn't want to spend time with her dad. Her parents separated. And she said to me, what does she say? Dad doesn't set the rules that he should. This was like an 8-year-old.
Wow.
And she said it's like if I was at mum's and I want to get mum's bed, she'll say, no, come on, back to bed. And she said, whereas dad will let me in his bed. And she said, and he probably shouldn't. And I just remember thinking this was incredible, that this 8-year-old was effectively saying, I don't feel safe because dad doesn't hold the boundary. And you talk about that with this instance, that kind of that whole group, I don't know if it was a platoon or what it was just becoming chaotic.
Yeah, I actually liken it to the book Lord of the Flies. And I think there's a lot of lessons in the book. Yeah, where in the absence of power and structure, it will form. It'll just be unhealthy, unregulated, not achieving the goals. And the military is the probably the most bureaucratic organization in the world, right? But it's some people think that we lead by just telling people what to do, but it's actually not, right? It's a really complex system of structure, like military orders and chain of command, and but it's also through like inspiring people to lead. And what I found in that organization that I took over in combat after they probably the most failing organization, it was the most failing group in the entire organization. And they actually had this self-fulfilling prophecies that we're the black sheep, right? So we're the bad guys. This is what we do, and that's really toxic. It's like a cancer, and it had already the leaders had already let that spread, and the leaders had put the thing on autopilot. So I faced a lot of challenges just as an individual leader on how like where do you start fixing this? And there are easy fixes on okay, we're going to start doing things the way that we all know they're supposed to be done. Because you're right, there's this ideal that the lack of orders and the lack of discipline is this freedom, right? And people will be happier by it. And this, like you said with kids, and like no, actually, and I luckily had like 16 years in the Army before that moment, and knew that high performing teams are actually very highly structured, following what we had learned over the history of war, things that work, things that build cohesion. And that's actually a much higher performing team than if you just let people do the things they feel like they want to do. And that'll be powerful too. Like actually just data wise, that's going to fail every time. And that's what I was seeing was a complete organization just failing. So I put back in the structure. I put back in the meaning of why they were doing what they were doing every day. And I had to make the hard calls of actually firing people, which in the military is actually a lot harder than people think. Like to get rid of somebody, like because you join the military, leadership. I had to actually get rid of some of the bad apples and informal leaders that had risen in this Lord of the Flies scenario.
I just thought it was really interesting, and it kind of linked again to where you were talking about kit inspection. And I think kind of from the outside world, a lot of us go, oh, I remember being told that my partner in kind of basic training was having to clean out his bin with a toothbrush, and that was obviously all part of the breaking down thing, and I was kind of like, oh my god, that's ridiculous, and he was crying about this, and I kind of thought I'd have been angry, I'd have just got on with it, it would have made me cry. But I thought it was really interesting. You said the sentence in the book, and I think you said, if you're not ready for kit inspection, you're not ready to fight. And it was this interesting link between the basics of, like you said, it's got that cohesive element again. If we can't support each other, so we're all ready, we're all right, actually we can't look after our kit properly, how do we do that out there? And I thought, it is that thing. I was talking to somebody about anxiety the other day, and I was trying to say to them, just make your bed as the first step you do. Just make, and they went, what's the point? I might come back and get in it, no one's going to see it. And I said, because it just gives you an initial piece of order to your day. And they said, how's that going to reduce my anxiety? And I said, it won't on its own, but it might be just 0.1 of a anxiety measure down, and if you start to do lots of these things, it will bring it down. And I thought that was just, I love that sentence. If you're not ready for kit inspection, you're not ready to fight.
Absolutely. So the idea about the bed, it makes complete sense to me, is understanding that having a feeling of control over chaos, right? The world is chaos. Giving people, and we do this in the military, right? We give them things to do that give them a feeling of control in the most chaotic of situations. But your point about the equipment, I think, and this is what I say in the book, it's really hard to judge cohesion, right? Either task cohesion or social cohesion. The way somebody takes care of their equipment is about them, right? The individual. Like, do they care about being a soldier, part of this team? But it, like you said, in basic training, most of basic training isn't about really training the individual. It's about getting the individual to understand putting team over self, to understand that in the military, you only survive life or death as a team. Every individual is a part of that team. So if every individual is not taking care of their equipment, like you said, they're not going to be ready to do their part as the team. And they're definitely showing the externalities of not caring about the team.
Mm.
And some people lose, even in the military, have to be reminded about that all the time. Like, look, I'm criticizing you as an individual because you're not doing your part of this team, and that tells me that you're not putting the team first.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, and just that such a small thing can have such an absolutely huge effect. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was you very candidly talk in the story about the time that you decided to try and build team cohesion. You know where I'm going, don't you?
I do know where you're going. Yeah.
By making your group run with gas masks on, and
Yeah.
that you really quickly realize this is a horrendous mistake, which I'm going to let you explain why this is a horrendous mistake. But the thing that I thought was really interesting was you realize this quite quickly, but you decide to make them continue to run. Right? And I was just interested in, please tell people why running with the gas mask on is a monumental mistake, but also what made you not change it. But also, would you change now? So, if you'd got yourself into that situation, would you stop the run now? So first off, why is running in a gas mask a problem, and what happens?
So one, let's talk about why I did it. So the theory of building cohesion in teams, right? You talked about going on this retreat and businesses do this, right? We know for a fact that shared hardship builds cohesion, right? We all survive that fear, like base jumping or bungee jumping. So the military is just iconic for this, right? We're going to do some hard stuff together as a group, and we're going to bond together, right? There's the band of brothers like running up this hill at Currahee, like, and it creates life memories, really, these hardships. So I had the idea, like, let's create a hardship in exercise by having everybody run 3 miles with the gas mask. I think I'd seen it somewhere in my military career. So running with a gas mask, just imagine wrapping your head in a plastic bag and putting a very small hole in it with a straw going out of it, and then now try to start running. Immediately it starts to go bad, right? So all the mucus in your just starts filling up, and people start vomiting in their mask. And this is what happens when I decided to do this, because I thought I was going to build some cohesion to my team, through some shared hardship. And I was wearing a mask as well. And you're right. So at one moment, it just turns into complete a horde of chaos of people throwing up and falling down. And I had to make a decision as a leader. Do I stop, recognize, and let the team know that I made a mistake, or do I keep driving on? So I made the decision to keep driving on and when to live to fight another day. And I didn't know this until reflection. Now, a good question: would I do it if I had done this again? Would I? So now, as a more seasoned leader, this is what I would have done that I didn't do. I wouldn't have stopped the run, but I would have had everybody take their mask off and keep running. So that's my inexperienced leader in me. I decided I wasn't going to, at that moment, I wasn't going to recognize or make known fault. I was like, it was like my second day on the job. So I kept going. I probably inspired hate more than I did cohesion. But I recognized it was a kind of the ebb and flow of leadership. I knew I needed another, and I talk about this in the book, create another moment, right? I'm big about creating moments, and I actually created a bad moment. Then it's going to happen. Now, as a senior leader, I would have had everybody take their mask off and continue running, just carrying their mask.
Yeah.
I have a little more wisdom now to know that's one of my options. At the moment, it was either my only two options at the moment were, hey, you need to keep driving on, or you need to stop completely. There was an option C that I didn't consider at the moment.
That's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting how it changes with experience. Absolutely. The kind of finally, one of the things again that you talk quite candidly in the book about is you talk about using energy drinks basically to keep going, and that kind of like a drug. You say I kind of was using sort of legal drugs and stuff, and you were getting up to kind of 5-6 pounds a day, and then you were having to order in stuff to help you sleep and to come down. So just tell us a little bit about that. Do you see that as the biggest challenge that you've had in your career, kind of mentally, or is there something else that would completely outweigh that? I know I might have missed kind of other bits I haven't read yet, but that's quite
Yeah,
an interesting.
no. As a leader, that was the moment. Personally, my wife got cancer later, and that was really hard for me. About control.
Yeah.
So I think this aspect of you can control everything was what was bringing me down. So I took this company, like we talked about in 2008, and everything was wrong, and I need to fix everything. So there's a thing we call the burden of command. You can call it the burden of leadership, but I felt that, and it was very real, and I felt like I needed to be doing everything, needed to be doing more. So I started, with one or two of these energy drinks that were actually issued to soldiers. I mean, just full of chemicals. And at any drug, you get dependent on it, and I needed more. So I was only getting 4 hours of sleep, and I needed more. And I needed, like you said, I was so wired all day on these. It was more than caffeine, right? There's all kinds of stuff in these energy drinks that I needed NyQuil to be able to even sleep for the 3 or 4 hours or more or less that I was getting. So, and I was a walking zombie, and pictures of me back then, my bags had bags on my eyes. And even when friends were saying like, hey, you need to take care of yourself, or you can't take care of your men. And we say that in the military, but it's really hard to put into practice. And I wanted to put that story in the book because I viewed it was a mistake, right? And you make mistakes. I wasn't recognizing that I needed to take care of myself, or I couldn't take care of my men. And I was also not setting the example. I mean, we have this problem with sleep in the military that we view it as like you don't need it, especially in war. Like, hey, this is your moment. You need to be able to survive without these things. And it was having cognitive impact. I was just breaking down. And I'd made a mistake. So that's what was happening. And if I could go back, that would probably be it was the most stressful time of my life. And I probably needed a senior leader. If I go back now, I could tell myself.
Yeah.
I think, every person is a leader, whether it's peer leadership, whatever it is. I needed somebody, or I needed to self-recognize that taking care of myself was as important as taking care of all these problems that I saw. So I was, in the military, we have, echelons of leaders. Maybe I was hiding it well. It was definitely a mistake I made in my leadership.
And how did you get yourself out of it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I actually did. My body was, of course, shutting down. So I was, falling asleep at moments. I mean, I think I didn't actually stop until I went cold turkey once I was done with the job. I think there's a couple of decisions in the book I talk about that were really hard for me. And I think as I look back, that was a huge mistake. And some of the decisions I had to make were harder because I just wasn't all there cognitively. So as soon as I returned, I stopped the energy drinks. I started sleeping more. I really wish I could have gone back and implemented that myself. I think a lot of people have this idea of this pressure and not taking care of yourself. So I think the only way, put it in the book is my solution of how to hopefully get other people to ask that question. Am I taking care of myself first?
It's interesting, actually. Something I see with a lot of my kind of business leaders and entrepreneurs all the time. I'm literally again talking to a client this morning, and she was just saying, oh, I haven't been able to exercise, so I'm feeling a lot more stressful. And I was like, you just got to put it back in, and I said to her, you'll lose your kind of, you might have your hour of exercise that you're losing from work time, but you'll gain it because you'll be so much more efficient for the rest of the day. And it's so, I've seen it time and time and time again. And even I trip into it, I can absolutely say I trip into it. I drop the diet, I drop the, the walk in the day, I drop it, and because I think, I must just carry on. And then you always just have to stop and reset, because it never works. It's never a working methodology. It doesn't work.
No, it's just almost like the leadership trap, right?
Yeah.
Just a little bit more. And there's always just a little bit. And I actually, like you said, I still face this trap, right? Where I just need to do this for this week, these 2 weeks, this month. And then I'll get back to prioritizing my health or prioritizing my family. it is a leadership trap for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's a really difficult challenge. I could talk to you all day, but I've kind of spoken to you for an hour and taken an hour of your time. Honestly, I could, yeah, fascinating, absolutely fascinating subject. I ask all of my guests 3 questions, so I'm going to ask you. So the first question is, thinking about, whichever challenge you want to choose, it doesn't have to be one we've spoken about. Was there a book, a film, or a piece of music that helped you through?
So there's a book that I didn't know about in the moment of my challenge that we talked about in war, but I learned about later that I think if it would have been given to me in that moment, it would have changed a lot. The Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. My wife was actually reading it in war, and I didn't know. Like I could have used that. So that's the book I think it would have put things in perspective for me.
Yeah, that is an incredible book. Absolutely. If somebody's listening to you today and they want to, make a change to their life, is there something that you could give them a tip or something that just would change something, whether a practical thing or a thing or a different way of thinking that you would recommend?
Yeah, in this book that I wrote, Connected Soldiers, I if I sign it now, I say stay connected to what matters most. Right. In the military, we get this other trap that the military is our number one identity, should be our number one priority. And then we actually let other things fall off that priority list, like family, like ourselves. In this complex world we live in, we have to stay connected to what matters most. That's the question people have to ask themselves, like what matters to you most? Family for me matters a lot now, but it could be my health or anything, but you have to stay connected to what matters most.
That's lovely. I love that. And the third one is, and I know you often are, so you might want to be careful with your answer. If you were standing in front of the world leaders today, you're probably the only guest I've ever had who's gone, and sometimes I do. What would you say to them? He's going to be very careful here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's pretty simple, but it's human. Is that of the world leaders that I respect and the ones I follow and I talk about, the greatest leaders are almost these self-fulfilling, like we talked about, we have these ideals of going into war. I have these ideals of great leaders. Great leaders are great communicators. So world leaders, I would want, you have to communicate to the world more. Some leaders have done that as a daily practice. Others are just, frequently, but the world's leaders we have put in position for a reason. They have to be the great communicators. They have to talk to us.
Yeah, it's lovely. It kind of takes me back to, there's a bit in the book where you say every single person has to know the mission. They have to know the purpose. They have to know why they're standing in the guard tower, why they're on patrol. They have to know it. I love that. Yeah, I thought that was absolutely fantastic. So thanks to that, doesn't it? We all want to know what's going on and what the purpose is of what we're being told. Absolutely fantastic. John, thanks so much. You're such a busy person, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to me. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I know our conversation will stay with me. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
So I'm on johnspenceronline.com. I'm big on Twitter at Spencer Guard, and really just anywhere out there. It's ironic. I wrote a book about the positives and negatives, but I'm pretty connected in the social media world.
And obviously, we'll put all the links in the show notes too. But thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it. And it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
An honor. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Mary Williams, as you know, and thank you so much for listening to the Alternative Leader podcast. I search for guests to bring you lessons and learnings that can help move you forward in your life, help you achieve the success that you want to, in whatever way that shows up for you, to help you lead powerfully, whether that's in your own life, as your parenting, your personal, or your professional, and make you the best that you can be. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review it, and please share it with as many people as you think also want to move forward and gain success in their lives. If you want to find out more about me, go over to my website, which is www.mary-williams.com. That's www.mary, which is MARI-williams.com, and you'll find links to all of my social media profiles there. There's also a Facebook community that you can join, and again, all the links will be on the website too. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening.